Hello, welcome to Other People's Kids, a podcast about Andy and Joey's adventures in fostering and adoption.
Hello and welcome to everyone who is discovering this podcast. Hope you enjoy it and good to have you.
Yep, we're two dads talking all things fostering, adoption, parenting, and more. Good evening, Andy. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Welcome to today's episode of Other People's Kids, the podcast about Andy and Joey's adventures in fostering and adoption. A long subtitle, isn't it?
It's a long subtitle, but I think it's catchy. People will remember it.
It is. It's like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's our adventures.
Andy and Joey sounds like a brand of ice cream which we could relaunch.
I think we should. We should sell ice cream, although I don't need any more ice cream, Andy. So you're keeping well today?
Yes, it is very cold. It is late March. It is spring, but it is cold and it's rainy and stormy.
Yeah, same here.
Would to some warmer weather.
Yeah, I'm fighting back against the bad weather. So this morning I went for a walk. It was vaguely sunny or not rainy, and I went for a well-being walk. Listened to a good podcast, and just kind of got my head clear, which is really good actually. I think it's a habit that I've done many times in my life, but I slip out of it. But actually, if I think about a walk in the morning, it really helps me. Definitely.
Yeah, how fast to walk?
How fast to walk? Medium? I don't know. 4 miles an
Distance
hour?
wise.
I
No,
don't
no,
have a speedometer on me,
I
oddly.
said how far, like, and what's the distance of the
Oh,
walk?
far. And so we live where we live near a river, so I can walk down to the river, which takes about 20 minutes. Then I can walk along the river endlessly. But I just did about, I think, an hour in total today. So walked to the river, walked around for a bit, and then came home, which
Okay,
is
so
lovely.
that's a good little distance, 3 or 4 miles. Yeah, it's good.
So what are we doing in today's podcast, Andy?
Well, Joey, as you know, this podcast is all about fostering and adoption. So we thought it might be of value to do a deeper dive episode into one of those subjects. And we thought, why don't we start with your story and journey, Joey, into fostering? So I've prepared some questions about fostering, if that's okay. I've got them listed. Just to stress, you've not seen these questions before, have you?
No, which is alarming because I quite like to be planned. And you'll catch me out, but it's fine.
You have bugged me all week to see sight of a plan or a list of questions, but no, we're going to be very generally open and feel free to give as much or little detail as you like. Cool. So, should we do some deeper diving into fostering? You ready? I think just for the listener, people will probably have some experience or knowledge about what fostering is, but just for the listener, if they don't have any concept understanding what fostering is, do you want to just unpack what exactly is fostering to begin with?
Wow, that's you got me already, Andy. So fostering is providing care for children on a short or longer term basis who, for whatever reason, can't be cared for by by their biological parents. That's a very simplistic version. But so there's different types of fostering. So you get, say, emergency fostering. A child, there's an issue of neglect or abuse in the home, and they're taken out of the home. They need to be fostered or cared for until they can work out longer term what the plan is for that child. But also you get things like kinship fostering. So that's where usually a child is cared for by another member of the family. So say a grandparent, because the parent perhaps is struggling or whatever, or even in death. Some children become orphans and parents die. Um, Sometimes children are relinquished, which is where a birth parent decides they don't want to look after their child. And fostering is kind of that sort of catch net, really, that provides safe homes for children and young people in the interim period between, going into care for whatever reason and then working out what's going to happen longer term. So that might be adoption, that might be a long-term foster placement, it might be a kinship or something called an SGO, a special guardianship order, um, which we'll go into in detail in later episodes, I'm sure. But that's generally what fostering is. It's kind of providing a safety net of a safe home for a child in the interim when they go into care before sort of their longer term plan is sorted.
I think I understood that. So yeah, your kind of role is quite static, but I guess the preceding history there's lots of different options there in terms of a domestic change that's happened within a family unit, and there's lots of different things. I think you provide that foster care placement, and then kind of post your involvement, the options again could be lots, as as just you've kind of unpacked.
Yeah, it's really, you have to really be flexible as a foster carer. So I think perhaps before we went into fostering, I think sometimes there's a bit of a stereotype that foster carers, come along, they look after a child, that child goes to foster care, and then they go straight into adoption. Actually, in our experience, that has been the hasn't been the most common occurrence. So I think maybe one child we fostered over 12 years has ended up in a permanent adoption placement. The majority of the time, actually, children are returned to birth parents. So role of foster care sometimes can be supporting the birth parents. So we've done a lot of that, working with the birth parents to help them kind of sort things out so they can care for their children again. Sometimes it's kinship, so it's going to other members of the family, the wider family. So yeah, it's about being really flexible about not only what happens afterwards, but also how long the placement is or the child is in your home. So we, officially speaking, for a long time have been emergency foster carers with the idea of being able to take placements at short notice. Um, some of those have stayed for a weekend, and some have stayed for 3 years. So you just have to be incredibly flexible as a foster carer, definitely.
That's good, and I'm sure we'll get into some examples of the children you fostered over the years. But just thinking before that, when did you first become aware or exposed to fostering in your personal life?
Yeah, so I have to go back a long time. So for me, so my parents fostered. So I was raised in Sussex on the coast, and I think I was probably 11 or 12 when they started to talk about fostering. I was the youngest of three, so I think my parents, I think they were looking forward and realizing that their parenting of children years were coming to an end. So my brother and sister were more independent. I was becoming more independent as a sort of 12-year-old. And I think they saw that, but they realised they had more to give. So more capacity to love, to care, to provide a safe home for children. And we'd had a wonderful childhood. We had holidays in Wales, endless summers playing in the garden, messing around. My dad making stuff for us, and go karts and climbing walls and all this sort of stuff. So we had a lovely childhood, really. And I think my parents realised they had more to give, and they thought they could give that to other children who needed it. So I remember them telling me they were going to foster, and at first I didn't really know what that meant. I think they said, so another child would come and live in the home. I thought that kind of sounded fun. That'd be good. I remember the fostering agency they went with did an event for the kind of children of new foster carers, and they gave me like loads of chocolate. I think I had a trip to the cinema, and I thought this is amazing. Oh, this is good. I like fostering. And then the first child came, which actually was really hard. So he was 11, I was 12. I had, up until that point, had rule of the roost, really. My brother was kind of off wandering around, being a grunger, going to gigs. He was never really at home. My sister was at college and was very academic. Um, so yeah, so I had my parents' attention a lot of the time. Suddenly I had this competition for their attention, which was really hard. But my parents were mindful of that. So I remember them asking me and checking in on me that I was okay. So I knew that I was important to them still, and still my status in the family hadn't changed. But it was a difficult first few years. But it must have panned out okay because I've ended up fostering. And I think probably one of the biggest factors, probably because my parents did, and just been inspired by them, really. Particularly the unconditional love they gave to the children they cared for. So, your children attacking them, wrecking the house, running away, but they continued to love them and provided a safe home for them. And I think that's probably the thing I most admire in my parents, really, is seeing that and how they've done that. And it's continued as well. So even after 20 or so years of fostering, 20 plus different kids, and they still care for and have involvement with quite a few of them. And one of them in particular, boy, they fostered for a long time. They're still very much a part of his life. He's part of our family, really. They are regularly seeing him, having him in their home, supporting him, helping him out. Um, yeah, and I think it's just really inspirational. That's probably a big reason why I first thought about fostering.
So it sounds like they were very an inspirational factor of you personally considering it to be a foster carer for your life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it's kind of that. And just other factors would be, so Helen, my wife, we had when we started foster, we'd had two children of our own, which we really loved. We'd always wanted children, and so Helen is from a very large family with five brothers and sisters. So it's very much like Chief by the Dozen. If you've seen those films, just very big, crazy, noisy family meal times, and I think she really wanted that, and so did I. We wanted lots of children. I think after having our two boys, we kind of felt that we could do that for other children. Um, and we're both as well, Helen and I are both from raised in church. So there's kind of faith was a big part of it for us. That kind of sense of social justice, of showing God's love. I think for me, I was always a bit frustrated. I think I always felt that churches were very good at, telling people who they should or shouldn't love, or how much money they should give on a regular basis, and what particular theology you're meant to have. But we're always a bit quieter on, all the stuff Jesus said about caring for the poor, for the widow, and for the orphan. So for us, I think it was an expression of faith as well, to provide a home for children who needed one. That was definitely a big motivator.
And I liked how you were speaking about it earlier, about when you were growing up as a child, and you had that concept of like just another child joining the house, like
Mm.
a new brother or sister. But I would expect that new person would be coming with kind of mental baggage and additional needs. And so what was the impact? I mean, you've talked about it already, but the impact of you having other children into your family home, and what's the impact been on your wider family now as a foster carer?
Yes, I mean, I remember when we first started talking about fostering, a lot of people, very well-meaning people, said, family and friends, said, you've got a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. Why are you fostering now? Shouldn't you wait until they're older? Um, and the worry was that that could have a negative impact on their life and on our boys' life, and that was hard because I think we kind of did listen to that a bit, but then we thought, no, we want to do this. We've got capacity to care for more children. We want to have a large family. Um, and it felt a bit risky. But actually, it's turned out to be brilliant, because it's really been good for our boys. I think they've become very compassionate, and empathetic young men, who naturally are quite caring towards others. And I think similar for me, having other children who perhaps hadn't had such an easy start in life coming into your home, as hard as it can be, I think it opens your eyes a bit to the reality of the world. Um, that actually your experience of childhood, for all its good and bad points, isn't the other people's experience of childhood. And sometimes people have missed out on what it is to have stable childhoods where parents are loving and generally do good things and helpful and loving and things and provide for you. Um, so yeah, so I think it's been really positive for us and for our family. My boys definitely see themselves as part of the team that we foster together. When we first started fostering in Bristol, I remember they gave the boys a foster carer cards, and that was the best thing you could have given them. They were so proud because they really felt part of the team of providing a home for these children.
Mm. So were you in your 20s or 30s when you started the process of becoming a foster carer? Can you remember?
20s. So
20s. Yeah.
we would have been 20, 27, 28, something like that.
Okay.
Pretty
Uh,
young.
very, very young. So just unpack a little bit for the listener. What do you have to do to become a foster carer? What's that kind of process like, and how long, and what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, it may well have changed a bit, but in my sort of, because I work for the Fostering Network, and we do work closely with different groups who do recruitment of foster carers, so where it hasn't changed hugely. So essentially, we at first, for us, we attended a meeting about fostering. So we were interested about it. We'd read some books. We'd obviously I'd experienced it as a child. We went on to a sort of an information meeting, run by the local authority, about what fostering is and why they need more people to do it. And then after that, we expressed an interest. Then they sent the gatekeeper to our home. It was essentially is a very experienced social worker who will come and kind of do an initial kind of assessment. Like, is it worth, are you weirdos? Basically, it's their job. Check to look in your home. Is there anything strange on the walls? Do they come across a bit weird? What is their motivation for fostering? That was, and so that was the kind of first visit, and then We were assigned an assessing social worker. So we were assigned a Catalonian lady called Monica, who was amazing. She was, loud, vibrant, just this wonderful personality. And then over sort of about 6 months, I think it was, most weeks there'd be an evening where she'd come to our house, and we'd sit down and go through something called a Form F assessment, which looks at everything, kind of our experience of being parented ourselves, our past relationships, our approaches to parenting our children, kind of our jobs, our financial situation, our friendship and support networks, our kind of beliefs around looked after children and understanding of trauma. Really an in-depth process, which I know can be very hard. We found it on the whole really good, because it gave us a bit of time to reflect on our parenting, and particularly on how we needed to change in order to be foster parents, because it is different. Being a parent to your own children is different than being a foster parent, because you are, as a foster parent, parenting on behalf of the local authority, in looking after these children, which is slightly different as a role. And it's important to understand that when you go into fostering, and obviously very different again to adoption in your experience, which is parenting. Whereas I talk about being a foster parent because you are providing that and doing that, but there are differences definitely.
It's different things you're allowed to do and not do, isn't there? Between your own birth children and foster children, isn't it?
Yeah, just awareness around safer caring guidelines and rules and things like that. And obviously, you have things like contact when you're managing contact with birth parents. Obviously, even things as little sometimes like haircuts. You have to have, so you don't, as a foster care, you don't have PR or parental responsibility for that child. That's held by the local authority. Um,
Yeah.
so, for example, we've had to get permission from birth parents or from social workers to get a haircut for a child before. Usually, all that's sorted at the beginning. So they have a meeting at the beginning, and stuff like that is kind of ticked off as okay, because it's a bit silly because you need to be able to care for a child, get the haircut. Um, but that's an example of where it's quite different.
I think
Um,
even when you're adopting a child, there's a bit of a twilight zone when you're placed with children to when you get the adoption order, the PR changes. I think we
yeah,
had a list of things we still needed to have permission for. I think you're not allowed to get a tattoo for the child. Like
yeah,
that was the first thing I was going to do, is
yeah,
going to
yeah.
march them down to the tattoo parlor and get a tattoo for them.
Yeah. No, some of it seems quite pedantic, but I think it's recognizing that that child is someone else's child that you're caring for. Um,
But you have some PR, don't you? You can have some autonomy
yeah,
and some
yes, yeah,
decisions.
yeah, because you obviously got to provide care for that child and emergencies and medical things as well, definitely. Yeah.
So thinking about back to your first placement, if you remember that, what was that like the first time you got given a child? Placed with a child to foster for the first time. What was that like for you and your wider
Yeah.
family?
Yeah, so one thing, and probably more in recent years, I've tried to avoid, because I always used to talk about our first placement. Um, but I think in recent years, I reflect on the language of placement. I think generally for care experienced children and young people, the word placement is quite not very helpful. So I mean, I think we use it professionally and in the kind of social care world, but actually, I always try to talk about them joining our home or joining our family, because they're not being placed as such; they're not an object. Um, but yeah, if I think back to our first one, so I think it was a Friday afternoon. It usually is when children end up coming to you. So this was a little boy. He'd been born a few days before, and he came. He wasn't able to stay with his mum for various reasons, and he came into our care. And I think the Friday afternoon arrived. And the first week was chaos, really. I think because we didn't sleep. I think because we were so aware of the weight of responsibility of caring for a child, but also someone else's child. It felt like such a big thing and such a responsibility. And I remember a lot of the time I was driving around trying to find, I remember driving to John Lewis to find the right car seats and going to 3 different pharmacies to find the right formula milk. Because I didn't know, because we breastfed our boys, so I didn't know that you can't just give any old powdered milk to a baby.
Yeah, you
They have
can't.
one type. They've got to stick with the brand. So I was trying to find this Aptimel or something, and That's
Someone is at the front door.
that's my doorbell going off. It off. So I just memories of that. I was all a bit rushed, not really sleeping, really chaotic. And then about a week in, one evening, we noticed the boy was quite hot, and really uncomfortable. And when we went to pick him up to comfort him, just the movement of his neck seemed to be causing him more discomfort. So that raised alarm bells. So we ended up phoning 999 that night, and he was rushed into A&E, into hospital, and it turned out he had meningitis. And if we had have waited till the next day, his outcome could have been a lot worse. So that was a real baptism of fire for foster care. It was a week in, and we're sat
Wow.
in hospital with all these pipes and fluids being pumped into this tiny little baby. Um, so that was quite traumatic in a way, um, but eye-opening. And also there were some wonderful things that came out of that. So he was okay. We came home a week later and actually was fine medically. It was during that time, particularly my wife got to spend a lot of time with the birth mum in the hospital because she came in as well. Um, and I think that was really eye-opening because I think you very quickly realise that, the reason this child's in care is not black and white, that actually she herself had been through a lot. Um, and I think in fostering, you do learn to have empathy towards the parents. Um, as hard as that could be sometimes when the stories you hear about what might have happened or not have happened. Um, but having a place of empathy towards them is helpful, particularly with fostering, because if you're fostering, say, an older child, the way you talk about their birth parents and the way you relate to them is important because they may end up going back to that parent. Um,
Mm.
and it's important for their sense of identity that they have a positive understanding of their parent as well, and in spite of all that's happened.
So you have to kind of real, but also stay quite neutral, I guess.
Not sort of making judgments and things like that, or being derogatory about them, which can be hard sometimes when the stuff you hear that goes on. Um, but it is important to maintain that.
So how many years have you fostered now?
We have fostered for coming up to 12 years. We've been
12
doing
years. And how many children over those 12 years have you fostered?
15, so 15 different children, all at different lengths of time. So some sibling groups, um, mainly younger, but some older children as well, teenagers as well. Um, yeah, it's been quite an adventure, really. So as I think we might have mentioned, we're currently in a break. So we hadn't had a sort of a gap in fostering for I think 5 years or so, and we wanted to spend some time just investing in our boys, checking they're okay. So we're now just back on the sort of list, ready to take a child into our home.
Good for you. There's no break in adoption, mate. It's full on every day
No, but
to the end
that's
of
one of
life.
the difference is we can. So I mean, I never turn the table slightly because I always wonder because for you, because obviously I've got the perspective of being a foster carer, and we have known children who've gone from our care, who've gone to adoption. Not often, but that has happened. But you're sort of sitting on the other side of that, aren't you? That story for that child. So you're an adopter who has presumably, what have your interactions with foster carers been, and how's that worked?
Yeah, I can tell you. I mean, it's been very limited because obviously we've only ever met one set of foster parents. And I think as an adopter, the journey through wanting to be an adoptive parent and going through the process of being assessed, a bit like the foster care assessment, and then panels after panels, at any moment, it could still be a no. So I don't think you quite kind of conceptualize what becoming a parent is until you get that final yes, you can be an adoptive parent, and then obviously place with children, identifying the children, and these could be your children, and that whole kind of process is quite surreal. So our experience was it was a young couple. They were younger than us because obviously we're very old people, so very, very younger than us.
Most people are younger than you, Andy.
Most people were younger than us. It was their first ever foster placement, so it was brand new to them.
Wow. Okay.
They had a child of our own who I think was kind of early teens. So our children were younger. I don't know if I should say the ages, but they're much younger than the person within that kind of placement. They're generally really good, really good. They had They're really good with our children, and that's a weird thing because they are our children, They will become our children, but yet they were kind of taking care of our children. So they were being the parents, and we were learning rapidly what we needed to know, because that kind of transition was about 10 days from like, okay, these are your children, we're placing with you them on this date. You got 10 days to learn how to become a parent. And when you don't have children, you might get up, 8:30, 9 or 11 o'clock in the morning. What we were doing in that 10 days were getting up at 5:30 or 6 and then driving to the foster carers who are a little drive from us. So you're totally exhausted just from not having that experience of getting up early. So we were trying to hear stuff like their routines, like what do they have for breakfast? I mean, what do you practically feed a child if you've never had a child? I've got no idea. So they were telling us all this stuff, right? You need to do this and you need to change the nappy like this. And you are taking some of it in and reflecting after it. I thought what might be helpful is if they just took photos of like their breakfast,
Mm.
because you totally forget, like they tell you, oh, they have this for breakfast in this order, but when you're placed with a child, you're scrubbing back in your notes thinking, oh my goodness, what do they tell us to feed them? It's so practical. But I was thinking, if the foster carer could literally just take a photo of their breakfast or their lunch, think, oh yeah, they have bagels or Weetabix, and you instantly gonna remember. So I thought that was a helpful thing to
Have made
reflect
it
on.
easier. I
Bit
think,
easier for us.
yeah, no, it's been so because we the experience we've had mostly the similar way is the transition of children we fostered to their sort of permanent arrangement, also the best term. So usually with a family member. And I think it was something that my wife does, which is really good, probably would have helped them, is she'll write sort of really clear lists of what they're. So at breakfast time, we usually have it at this time. This is the things that they like to eat. This is the things they don't like eating. And so that sort of, because routine, as you know, with kids, is it's all about routine, isn't it? Getting them into a routine and know, yeah, just simple things. So,
I
yeah,
don't
so
think I had that. I don't think I had those lists. Excuse me. Or those lists won't get given to me, but they get given to my wife.
yeah, but you were
I
dealing with a huge change in your life. That's the thing. So because I guess as foster carers, we had been parents to our children, and then had sort of an ease in, and also had started with a newborn, so you sort of had that natural sort of progression into parenting
Yeah.
other children. But for you, it was kind of 0 to 100.
We were going for no children to 2 children, literally within 10 days, and at different ages. You need to learn how to care for 2 children at different life stages. It was like a bomb that went off. But the foster carers were excellent and really good. There was one occasion, and we were just hanging out with everyone, the foster carers, and the wife had been away at work, so the husband was at home, and the wife noticed something that what the boy had done, and the male foster carer said, "Oh yeah, that's his new thing, like today." Like, and I was thinking, "Ah, I wasn't there for that new thing." And it did feel a little bit kind of odd because and I felt like I'd missed out so much of their lives, and I'd missed that kind of special moment from that day. And it might have just been walking across a room or headbutting a wall, whatever. That was the new thing. But I was thinking, oh yeah, just be, and I'm sure you are, and I'm sure everyone connected to it does, but just be mindful of the rawness that adopters are at, that this very vulnerable position where they're about to change their life forever. We're taking in so much information.
Mm.
We're probably scared, frightened, bewildered. Why on earth did we do it? Excited, really happy, all these different emotions. And it's kind of helping the adopter through that process as well. Obviously, the most important people are the children in the whole process. But the adopters, they're in such a vulnerable position of becoming mum and dad, but had no experience of that to that date. And seeing the children, the foster carers are their mum and dad on a temporary kind of
Mm.
taste. It's just a very weird kind of process to go through.
Mm. No,
We
it
didn't
is.
have much. We did meet up in the park a few years after when they were placed with us, but that kind of fizzled out, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to get it right, isn't it? Because ultimately, it is about the child, isn't it? But actually, that transition needs to go well, to help that child because it's huge for them, isn't it? A change of caregiver, a primary caregiver is a huge change in their life.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, as I know from a foster care's perspective, it's really hard emotionally. But we've always generally had the view that we kind of keep a lid on it a bit. whilst we're with the family members or new adopters and things, until after they've gone, and that's when we cry and we get upset and we sort of go through a grieving process, which is hard every time. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, you're trying to do everything you can to make that smooth. And so yeah, I mean, it will come up in other podcasts, but I think we plan to a podcast on transitions, don't we? So maybe a bit more of a focus on that transition between foster care to adoption and how we manage that and support the children, and deal with the emotions of it as well. So I think just being a man, Andy, do you think there was opportunity for you to talk about this kind of stuff at the time? Did you feel you had support emotionally? Because obviously carrying all that, bringing new children to home, I know, just through fatherhood is really hard, and to suddenly go from nothing to everything overnight effectively must have a big impact. Did you feel you had support available, or what was
Well,
it?
I had a very good friend called Joey who was
Yeah.
there to help me through anything. I think officially you have a social worker who
Yeah.
you can talk to, but I mean, by the end of the process, we weren't telling our social worker much at all anymore because at the end we couldn't really trust them or the system. But that's for another podcast.
Oh, another
Um,
podcast. Oh, that's a
but
juicy.
I think yeah, having kind of a very strong network, maybe one or two people you can chat to through the process, I think would help anyone going through it. But in terms of your experience, what practical things, if someone's listening to this thinking, oh, I might like to explore a bit more about fostering, what should they be doing now?
What should I be doing now? So I think probably one of the biggest things would be to um, ignore negative stories about fostering and adoption, as it applies to adoption as well. So I think, particularly this world of social media, anytime you see an advert for foster carers or something on Facebook or whatever you're looking at, you always see endless comments of people saying, "Oh, I did it and it was terrible and there was no support and blah 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 blah." And I think I'd encourage people to ignore that, because there is a lot of positive experiences of fostering. There's some amazing foster carers around who have wonderful stories, even in really hard times, some really challenging circumstances, where fostering is really a real privilege. So I count fostering as a privilege in our life and something we love doing. And so I think in terms of practical things to be doing, so reading about what fostering is, so reading books about it, think about things like trauma and attachment, understanding the impact of a child going into care, coming away from their primary caregiver as in their birth parent, and the impact on them of that. So books, people like Dan Hughes, who you would have come obviously the PACE model. So building the bonds of attachment was a big book for us in the early stages of fostering. People like Bruce Parry, really good. So he recently wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey. Has What Happened to You? I think it's called. So just starting to read, understand what fostering is, the impact on children, and then find other foster carers to talk to and ask them what it's like and get kind of real views. And yeah, then just contact your local authority or a fostering agency, whatever you decide to go for, to find out more, would be my main advice.
They're great practical
Or the
tips.
naysayers.
Ignore the naysayers.
Because
Good.
children, there is a massive crisis in social care. There are thousands of children across the UK who need safe, stable homes to live in, either through fostering, through adoption, um, and there's a real lack of people putting themselves forward to do that. Um, and I think often we can come up with excuses for why we can't do it. So whenever I say I'm a foster carer, people often say to me, "Oh, that's wonderful, but I could never do that because of X, Y, or Z." And I always feel like saying, "Well, it doesn't make any difference to the child, does it? They still need a home."
They do.
So yeah. So I'm
Um,
going to get
I,
to
I,
yeah.
I've got two very quick last questions for you. In what 5 words would you say would summarize what a good foster carer should be or is? What 5 words
Only 5 words. I think a good foster carer
is?
is. I think you need to be unconditionally loving. Um, I'm going to make that as one word. Unconditionally
Okay.
loving. You need to be really flexible, um, in terms of changes. So sometimes you can't plan things. You can't plan holidays. Sometimes you can't really know when things are going to change or when children are going to come and going to go. Um, you need to be really understanding that we're working in a largely, I say a broken system. What I mean is we work in a system with people who are dealing with, broken relationships and, children who've been through significant trauma. Um, and so therefore things aren't always smooth or easy, and can't always be predicted or expected. So things might change at the last minute, things might happen that are frustrating, but we kind of need to accept that and understand that actually social services are under huge strain as well. And on the whole, the people working within it, so social workers, are trying to do their best. So understanding that, I think, is important. Um, yeah, and I think, is that five? Is that three, four?
A lot of words you've given me.
I've given a lot of work. Nice. Sorry, Andy.
That's good. No, that's good. I heard unconditional, flexible, accepting, and some other stuff.
Yeah.
That's good. Final question, Joey, and it's great to hear more about your story. Thank you for being so open and honest. If you were to summarize what fostering means to you, either in 3 or 5 words or a short sentence, could you think of something that encapsulates your experience, your kind of heart for fostering? What would you say, Joe?
This is why I wanted pre-warning of the questions, Andy, so I
It's
could
raw. Is it raw?
uh,
Give me 3 words.
it's a privilege would be my I often think that. So especially seeing, I mean, my wife is naturally a very good mum and is very nurturing. And seeing her with the children we care for, particularly on a daily basis, and how she cares for them and loves them, and the routine she provides. I mean, I'm part of it as well, but seeing her is a privilege, and seeing the impact on my boys and how it's made them kinder people, um, is a privilege. And then maintaining relationships with a lot of the families children have returned to. So some of our really good friends, are the families that children we fostered have gone to and we spent time with and now meet up with every holidays. That's a real honour and, a really special part of being a foster carer.
Amazing.
That's more than a sentence.
More than a privilege. That's great. Is there anything else you want to tell us about fostering, or should we leave it there?
I think more will come out over the weeks as we chat. More will come out, and I'm kind of what I'm looking forward to, Andy. So we've obviously mentioned a bit about your story, and we are going to talk more about the transition process. And we are talking our stories in these couple of episodes. So we're talking about your story next time, but also as we get other people in, hearing their perspectives, because it's never the same. For everyone, for every foster care, for every adopter, for every kinship carer, for every person who goes through special guardianship, the story is going to be a bit different. And that's what I really like, is hearing people's stories, and being encouraged. And I really hope that people listen to this kind of get an essence that, when understanding that this is a wonderful thing to do. Providing a home for a child that needs it, whether permanently, whether temporarily, is a privilege, is an honour. And I think a lot more people could do it. It's not for everyone, but I think a lot more people could do it and provide a home for these children. So that's my hope.
That's great. I think that's really come through today, and hopefully today's podcast would encourage people to consider it if it is right for them. So thank you, Joe. And next week, yeah, we will be delving more into my own story as an adopter. And if you could prepare some questions, that'd be great.
Yeah, I won't be telling you the questions, though, Andy. Now I'm going to keep them hidden and spring them on you next week.
Oh,
So thank you everyone for listening. I hope it's been a good listen for you. As ever, please do get in touch at hello@otherpeopleskids.co.uk, and we will shortly be putting together some social media presence. But I think I need to learn the Instagram, which I've never used really.
the TikTok.
The TikTok, the Instagram, and the facial book. I think we need to get on there, Andy, don't we? Raise our presence. But
We should.
thanks for listening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Other People's Kids podcast. If you want updates when new episodes are released, please subscribe and look out for our social media accounts coming soon.